What's your fuel? What's the motivation? Because I think a lot of people have this idea that they're going to go into a build phase, they're going to start a growth phase, and that motivation is going to come, pretty soon after entering that state. You get a little bit more food, performance goes up, and yeah, I would hope. And maybe there is this honeymoon period where you're like, okay, like this actually feels a lot better than it did when I was on 1,400 calories doing, multiple hours of cardio a week. I tend to see that. Some people, they live that out, and maybe they ride it out for, the first 4 to 6 weeks. But eventually you hit the point where you're like, okay, I'm numb to the performance increases. Actually, I'm starting to feel a little self-conscious, a little unsettled about, maybe like it's a stomach thing, which like it sounds silly, but like so many people, they're like, hey, if my stomach feels full, if I feel like I'm bloated, if I feel like I'm carrying like more weight, I feel a little heavier, that's going to fuck with me throughout the entire day. That's going to fuck with me in my training. It's going to fuck with me whenever I get up. I'm going to second guess the kind of clothes I should wear, the outfits, that I buy, whatever. For me, my last build, this hit me at a certain weight. And I can tell you that weight, right around 140, that's when I start to feel like, don't love this nearly as much. 130 to 140 is a fun honeymoon period. It's great. Even like 137, I start to get a little nervous. I'm like, oh, I can kind of see the end approaching. 140 and up, 140 to 145, that's where things start to get tough mentally. Now, this is where I really think you need to tap into your fuel, your internal, and this isn't a motivation, but this is your why. And for the record, if you go into a build and you're like, you know what, like I don't have the motivation to even get started. Like, Corey, how do I convince myself that this is actually worth it? Well, I can't tell you this is going to work for everyone, but for me, it wasn't so much finding a positive motivation. Like there was no like imagery or really even like visualization that I would say helped me. It was rather looking at everything that I had done thus far, how hard I'd worked, and how dissatisfied I was with that final outcome, and really honing in on that feeling. The feeling I had at the end of my fat loss phases where I was around girls who were much bigger than me, who had much better glutes. And I mean, granted, like I believe I train really hard. I believe I'm doing everything that I can to get the most out of my efforts. But seeing other people, it wasn't in more of like a jealousy sense or even a comparison sense, but just a realization that like I don't have the glutes that I want to have, or I don't have, my shoulders are fine. I'm not bitching about those. I don't have the glutes that I want to have. I don't have that curvy shape. I have such a my waist is so small, but like the fact is my glutes are not big enough to create the ratios that I want, that I need to be competitive. And like that idea that I want to go two ways with this. Your idea of your standard for what you want out of your body, how you want your body to look. Don't sell yourself short. I think the higher you can set the bar, if you're someone who's like, hey, I want to look like Laura Lee, like that's the look that I want to have. I want to have that degree of muscle. Amazing. Set it there. But then you need to calibrate your expectations in contrast with what you're willing to forego in order to work towards that goal. And maybe that goal does require, a 5-year process. Maybe the place you're in right now is so far from that. So you're committed. It's going to take a lot of time. And if it is, amazing. But just ensuring that like, hey, are you doing the things that are actually going to get you there? Because if that's a 5-year goal to get to Laura Lee's glutes, and I just use her because she's some of the biggest glutes in the top of the sport. If that's the goal and you're like, okay, realistically, the amount of pounds that's a pretty big gap. If you're competing every year, or maybe you're not competing, but you're in your growth phase, your off season, and you're like, yeah, but I got vacation coming up, so I'm going to cut down. Oh, well, I'm starting to feel like a little uncomfortable. So I just want to make sure I'm not getting too far off. It's not to say like one isolated, like, okay, you decide this makes sense to go into a mini cut. But if you're not being productive in like showcasing through all of your efforts that you're actually working towards that goal, well, all it's going to be is this mile marker we're kind of glancing over at, like, oh yeah, one day, but like there's really nothing occurring in the present that's moving you closer. You're kind of just idling. Now, for some people, it's not even a matter of like persuading them that they need to go through this growth phase. You don't need persuasion when you have compliance. And I'm unfortunate that a lot of people, like majority of the people that come to me, they're like, hey, I'm fed up with the final product. I want to build and I want to do so in a way I'm okay to use drugs, but I only want to use them if absolutely necessary. I want to really ensure that I've maxed out everything that I can do naturally, or secondary to that, okay, I'm ready to take drugs. I feel like I've maxed out everything I can do. I would like to put something in place. I just want to do it in a relatively safe way. And for those people, it's like, okay, the compliance is assumed that it's already, I assume it's already going to be there if you come to me with that information. If you come to me with that, I guess that opening statement. If you don't have that, because I also find this, like I'll get those clients who say exactly that. And they're like, but here's the caveat. I struggle gaining weight. I struggle letting myself gain weight. And if that's you, okay, it doesn't mean that we can't work together. It doesn't mean that the answer is to not go into a build, or the answer is to go into a build aggressively. Really, our starting point is figuring out how to persuade yourself that there's value in complying to a plan like this, a plan that facilitates muscle growth. Now, personally, I'm much more motivated by pain, discomfort, dissatisfaction. Those feelings are motivating for me. Some people are more motivated running towards something. So you kind of got to weigh these two options out. What motivates you more? Running towards something or running away from something? It's going to be highly individualized. I mean, I can tell you that for me, dissatisfaction ruins me. It's something that haunts me and I ruminate on it. And I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing. I think it's something that has allowed me to chase endeavors that, frankly, if I was just hoping, working towards this, facade of this better outcome, I don't know if I would be in the same place. Really, the fear of not changing, the fear of continuing to have that dissatisfaction at the end of a fat loss phase, that is ultimately what drove me to commit to an intentional growth phase, commit to eating the food, commit to all of the loose ends, the open tabs that, frankly, all of these things, they matter. They might only move the needle like 1 or 2%, but others will move it much more than that, like diet, sleep, hydration, training. But I think the real issue comes in when you don't have that compliance, when someone puts themselves in this position where they're like, okay, I'm going to commit to a growth phase, signing up with Corey, cool. We get started. And I'm going to tell you, I've had this happen so many times where we'll get going, 3 weeks in, someone's feeling uncomfortable. They're not communicating this. It's not being like noted in their check-in. And then finally, week 4 through 6. I mean, that's typically when I see this happen for most people who fall into this type of client. They're like, I don't think I can keep doing this. I'm so uncomfortable with my body. I don't feel very lean at all. This is the heaviest I've been. I don't think I can commit to another, let's just say 8 to 12 weeks of this. That just seems impossible. Like, how heavy am I going to actually get? And I look a little deeper and I'm like, okay, well, looking back on check-ins, I'm like, like, you know what, this person, yeah, they didn't mention this in those first few weeks, but my inclination, I'm like, they probably felt this way week 1, week 2, week 3. They probably were already experiencing mild transient thoughts that ultimately led them to feel like, okay, I'm done. I can't continue forward. Or I'm at the point where this is so overwhelming that I feel like the only solution is to enter into a mini cut. Now, this conversation at this point with a client who's like, hey, like I'm ready to tap out the first month and a half in, typically goes something like this. I want to pose the question, and for me, this is resemblant of the internal dialogue I have. I'm going to go like okay, if I continue to do the thing that I'm doing right now, if I continue to do this for the next 5 years, what does that look like? And to be frank, like this isn't just about like building, like this is my decision-making process with any kind of habits, good or bad. But when I'm assessing like, okay, whether this is something that is productive, whether this, is worth the risk or worth the time, worth the mental fatigue, because fuck, I will run that one into the ground, just circling around. I try to ask myself, if I were to continue to do this, if I were to continue with this behavior, what would that look like? And I don't just skip past that visualization, that I guess that imagery down the road. I'm really trying to consider, okay, well, like am I prepared for the compounding effects of, let's say in this case, like building, like am I prepared to go through another series of, let's just say like whatever, 2 shows a year for 5 years. Okay, so am I willing to go through 5 more seasons of bodybuilding feeling the same way? Will I still be the same person if I do that? Or will that start to really weigh on me? Will I start to question whether I'm a good athlete? Will I start to resent this passion that I have? Will I start to, and I know myself pretty well. I don't think I'd ever start to begin pointing fingers or like, oh, this isn't fair because X, Y, and Z. But that is something that like very, very commonly, like I see like girls in the sport who are like, you're under muscled. They're also the ones that are conveniently like, oh, she got this treatment because she looks this way and because she's on this team and because she's associated with this company. And it's like, those things all might be valid, but it doesn't change the fact that like you are now assessing something that you lack, a deficit that is within your control, and you're giving someone else the power, really the responsibility to dictate that outcome. Whereas there's no ownership reflected back at you.